The mid-2000s were very odd years for Spider-Man, at least in the comics. While Tobey was making the third and final movie in the original Raimi trilogy, Spider-Man in the comics was going through a lot of changes. For starters, Spider-Man the Other storyline ran for 12 issues, basically telling a story where Peter died, goes through a rebirth, and ends up with cool new powers, such as stingers that make him look like Ezio from Assassin's Creed, night vision, and the iconic organic web shooters that we saw in the movies. Another thing to note here is that during this time, Peter and MJ were married, and Aunt May knew about Peter being Spider-Man. This wasn't the usual hard-stuck down on his luck Peter Parker that we usually recognize in the movies. Peter actually had a life in the comics. Then, Civil War happened. When the biggest event in the Dark Reign era of Marvel took place, it was no surprise that Marvel's flagship title and character was at the center of it all. I won't talk about Civil War, but I want to know how important Spider-Man was in the story, even though he didn't even do anything in it. The story was mainly about Iron Man and Captain America anyway, but Peter had to be in the story just because he's Spider-Man. Thoughts on Civil War aside, the biggest change the event did for Marvel besides the Superhuman Registration Act was reveal Spider-Man's identity to the public, which was a big change. But I'm not here to talk about Peter's role in Civil War. What I want to talk about is Aunt May. With the whole world knowing who Spider-Man was, it was a matter of time that bad guys would go after him and his loved ones. And this was perfectly shown when an assassination attempt on Peter failed and Aunt May took the bullet instead. Enter the Back in Black storyline, where Peter goes back to his iconic black suit to hunt down Aunt May's shooter, and man, Peter gets really dark here. From breaking people's bones to breaking in prisons and having a brutal yet cathartic beatdown of Kingpin, who was responsible for the assassination attempt. This was without a doubt a very dark moment for Peter and Spider-Man, and it wasn't getting any better. Aunt May wasn't gonna make it from her wounds and was bound to die, and Peter was very desperate to save her. And then, the Devil came. Enter one of the most hated Spider-Man stories of all time, One More Day. I know, I'm finally getting to the topic of the video. In One More Day, Peter realized there is nothing he can do to save Aunt May. Attempting to go back in time at one point and failing, which No Way Home clearly referenced when Peter asked Doctor Strange to go back in time. Let's pause for a moment. This is a really great milestone for Peter. The person whom he cared about the most his entire life is dying, and it's because of his own action. It's a good moment for growth and a great callback to Uncle Ben's famous responsibility speech, showing how revealing his own identity came back to haunt him and hurt those who he cares about. You would think this whole arc Spider-Man went through, from rebirth to losing his way and being reminded that his actions have severe consequences, is ending pretty fittingly. But you'll be wrong. So what really happened is that the devil, Mephisto, shows up and tells Peter and MJ that he can save Aunt May if they give up their marriage in return. Yeah, this wasn't Marvel's finest moment. From Peter Parker, the best moral compass Marvel had to offer at the time, to be making a deal with the devil to the absurd cost of giving up love and marriage. Even for comic books, this was very bad and made no sense character-wise. It felt very uncharacteristic to Peter, to MJ, and Mephisto himself. So yeah, Peter and MJ agreed to the devil's deal, and he saves Aunt May, but by erasing their marriage from ever existing. Basically, Marvel found a way to reset every major event in Peter's life, back to his pre-MJ marriage. This means dead characters coming back to life, such as Harry Osborn, to Peter going back to being the classic street-level broke and down on his luck poster child of the Marvel Comics. Because, and I quote the Marvel editors at the time, a married Peter Parker makes for a less interesting soap opera than a single Peter Parker going about his nerdy kind of life. Now, reboots and status quo changes are nothing new to comics. Hell, DC has them every couple of years like some sort of a ritual. I get it. Marvel thought the current status of Spider-Man was in the way. Whether it was sales or creative direction, pretty sure it was sales, they needed to change Peter to go back to the older days to tell those classic stories again. And man, doesn't that sound like something some people were needing from the MCU Spider-Man?
Mr. Stark! Mr. Stark! Mr. Stark! Mr. Stark! I know, Mr. Stark. Mr. Stark, it smells like... I mean, Mr. Stark knows because Mr. Stark. That's Stark. Hey, Mr. Stark. Mr. Stark was like, hey, Mr. Stark, so... Mr. Stark needs...
Understand.
Stark said you'd say that. Mr. Stark. I want Mr. Stark to know. Hey, Mr. Stark. Mr. Stark. Mr. Stark. Mr. Stark. Thank you, Mr. Stark.
Now a quick word about how I feel about MCU Spider-Man movies. I like them. I think they have some of the best Spider-Man moments in movies, like Peter lifting the building in Homecoming and the whole Mysterio sequence. But also I think they have some detached from source material energy that I never really felt with the past two Spider-Man iterations. But with that being said, No Way Home is straight up the best out of the trilogy. And not because of the nostalgia pack that came with Toby and Andrew. It is because of the MCU handling of Peter that I walked away smiling, with tears in my eye. So let's recap the ending. Peter realizes that in order to save the world, he has to make everyone forget his identity. Which, yeah, sure, that's fine. It's literally what he wanted from the beginning of the movie. But he decides to do it even though it will make his best friend's girlfriend and his entire support system to disappear. Peter willingly gave up everything in his life in order to save the world. And to put the icing on the cake, he decides not to tell MJ and Ned about his identity again, and gave them up for good because he realized how much better their lives are without Spider-Man. If this is not the perfect encapsulation of who Peter Parker is, then I don't know what is. Okay, PS4 Spider-Man gets that cake, but still. Just seeing Peter living on his own, dropping out of high school and studying for the GREs, seeing all the sacrifices he makes while never getting rewarded for it, knowing that with his powers comes a weight he has to carry, that's Spider-Man. Now, I won't sit here and talk about what makes Peter Spider-Man or anything. Many different people did that already, and they did it really well. I'm just here to talk about how this movie did One More Day, but better. So let's dial it back a bit. Peter losing Aunt May? Check. Peter giving up something dear to him for someone else? Check. Resulting in readjusting the status quo and returning to a classic Spider-Man setting? Also check. So you might ask, given the overall similarities, besides the devil, what makes No Way Home work and One More Day doesn't? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear for me, and that is earned consequences. The biggest takeaway from One More Day that I kept seeing online was that people were angry, understandably, because they liked Peter and MJ together. Some even saying the problem of the story is that Aunt May is already old and gonna die from old age anyway. So why bother making a great sacrifice, costing a very solid relationship when the trade-off should not make any sense? And I get it. I mean, they're not wrong. From a trade-off point of view, it seems really shitty. But that's not the actual problem with One More Day. It's not that Peter and MJ's marriage is more important than Aunt May's life. No, it's Peter's apparent lack of growth during the past couple years. Peter died, quite literally, came back to life, had to go through a very tough moral dilemma in Civil War, reveal his identity, and as a result, put his family in danger, go through a very dark period in his life, where he stopped pulling back his punches, to realize saving his aunt's life is not in his hands, and he cannot do anything about it. And instead of accepting the consequences of his actions and the burden of responsibility he holds as Spider-Man, he simply makes a monkey paw wish to undo it all. As a result, we get a Peter that did not experience any of these events, at least not in the same extent that we saw him go through, losing all the character development he gained in the process, fully resetting his life as a clean slate like nothing has happened. This means One More Day undid many of the crucial and very important stories that Peter lived through without any gain. That's the problem with One More Day, and that is why No Way Home works. After the reset is done in No Way Home, we see a Peter that is grown, who understands the responsibility that came with his powers and consequently gives up everything he had, quite literally with his friends, family, school, etc., just to save the world. It wasn't to purely reset the status quo, and most importantly, it wasn't to undo the consequences of his actions. Peter accepted that what he did led to Aunt May's death. He came to accept that he did the right thing, and sometimes doing the right thing will only hurt you. But you have to do it. That's the whole idea behind great power and great responsibility. This is what I call earned consequences. In No Way Home, you feel that the bittersweet and sad ending is earned by the character development and the growth Peter went through in his journey to get to this point. Where in One More Day, it feels like a cop-out because Peter did not learn anything from his experience during those very dark times and took an easy way out instead, completely going against everything he stands for when it comes to responsibility. And to add on that, Mary Jane's story in One More Day goes unresolved since Peter also forgets about his marriage. Where in No Way Home, Peter still has his memories, and through him the audience actually get to see the good future MJ will have because Peter's action, rather than being detached to her. This is how No Way Home fixes One More Day. It highlights how the consequences of Peter's action have actual weight and merit in his life, rather than just being easily changeable and forgettable. Now I'll admit, the reset of Peter's life wasn't the worst thing in the world. After One More Day, we got Brand New Day, and we got to see writer Dan Slott take over Spider-Man and basically reimagines Peter's life in today's world, away from the major events he's been through, and through new events like Spider Island, Superior Spider-Man, and Spider-Verse. Spider-Man's life took a whole new direction, one for the better I would argue, but that's a topic for a whole new video. For now, I'm just happy about how big Spider-Man is around the world. From multiple ongoing titles, to video games, to movies and TV, we truly are living in the Renaissance era of Spider-Man, and I hope we get more of it.